Can I ask a quick, because I have a mic.
Yeah.
Are designers ever part of your teams?
I am there's the designer is, so I'm the head of the team. I'm the head UX guy and the head front end guy, but I'm definitely more a UX person than a front end person as far as just my life experience. And then I have the one other pure UX design person and 2.5 other pure front end people. But it's funny because when you have that small of a condensed team, a lot of the front end guys are saying, hey, I kind of mocked this up in code. And the designer will definitely come more from the Photoshop or balsamic approach to how he mocks things up. But there's a lot less of this, I have made the artifact, I pinned it up on the wall and I walked away, which I think that's, larger design organizations, even in companies, will do that kind of, here we are done, and we are handing it over. And you have these people just chucking bags over the transom at each other. So I think the benefit is for us is that it is 100% integrated.
Yeah, at Paperless, we are slowly fixing that. As we were talking about, is that we kind of throwing things over the fence, and it's like we're not waterfall, but we kind of are. Where we have somebody who puts the UX together, then after that UX is finalized, somebody then does high fidelity mockups, and then maybe at that point I will see it. Or it goes to a Rails developer, they build it out, and then they're like, hi, Rachel, fix this. So
sometime with artisanally made markup.
On Wednesday, we are going to attempt, for the first time ever, to have a designer sit with me and other members of the front-end team to do design in browser and like pair design programming. I'm not exactly sure what the appropriate terms are for that. Yes, thank you. That will be, I will report back, and I am interested to see how that goes because our UX and designers, I think, are probably really scared of HTML and CSS. Probably don't even know SASS really, but it'll be a learning experience for all of us. And we really hope that that'll kind of break that cycle.
I mean, I don't really have like a large team at all. I have like me, and I just hired another girl to help me, and then there's like a UX designer, and he's not in the code at all. But we have had so much improvement in the way that some of our new features have been coming out when him and I sit down and like have this conversation. And we're working on some mobile stuff right now, and so he was doing wires for it because we do have to show our client and get some approval. But we sat down and talked about it first, and like we're doing it together. And like the stuff, the first round of wires he did kind of without me, and then we sat down and talked about it. And the second one was just like miles better. It was so good. So I'm sure y'all will have really good luck with that.
I hope so.
Rachel, how did that process change? How did you get to the point where this is going to happen on Wednesday, like internally?
Well, the starting point was attending SASS meetup a couple weeks ago in New York City. I attended.
Did you know this already?
Did I? No, I mean she had asked the question there, so I was like, oh my goodness, they're actually doing it. So I was thrilled to find out how you got to.
So I think I was originally interested because the talk that night was going to be talking about maybe mobile.
Responsive web design, I think was.
Yeah, and I dragged along a coworker who was also passionate about not having stuff thrown over fences. And we're just kind of like, okay, this responsive thing is good, but how do we actually get this into our workflow? Because there's no way that the way that it currently is, where people are like putting stuff in stone, and if it trickles down all the way even after development happens, and then I'm given this thing and saying, well, it doesn't look exactly right, can you fix it? It's just like there's no way then for me to take that and actually create some type of responsive design, because I would have to be like rewind all the way back to try to implement that. And
you should have built a time machine.
Right.
Like that should have.
I know that's my problem. I keep getting told that time machines. Yeah. But I went to the meetup, and we're just like, we're so frustrated. How do we how do we start change at our organization? And Sam was like, sit that designer next to you, and just do it. And that was already probably over a month ago, and we're finally doing it on Wednesday. So, it takes time, and you have to convince people. And one of our biggest issues, I think, is changing behavior of the other people there. people can get really excited, but there's a lot of doubt that goes into, oh my gosh, now I have to sit with somebody. I mean, I picked a design job so I wouldn't have to talk to anybody.
I thought that was developers.
Same with developers, but I mean, but it's just like, I actually was talking and it's like, I don't know how I'm gonna deal with like working with somebody, because I think some people pick certain positions just so that they can be, they can enjoy their world. And I've noticed this change where it's like you can't just like hand stuff off anymore in the environment that we're in. And I think we have to be more.
I think the lines are blurring a lot.
Yeah, it's like I'm moving into more designy things, and then also still on the development, and it's just like we can't have silos anymore.
Yeah, well, as even as a developer, if you're responsible for the actual logic that happens behind the interaction, then you also are a stakeholder in
those
how
are
the
UX
interaction.
Choices. Those are choices for your users, and you have to be aware of that.
So you have to be at least aware, at least marginally involved. But I think there's also two things. Is that there's the caution to back up is there's the line between let's get involved and let's have lots of opinions.
And then also
it's about respecting other people's expertise. So I think that when you come to people, and that's the kind of success I've had with working with designers, is I straight up start sentences, well, given your expertise, in a very super you are the most excellent designer I've ever known, sentence. But that puts people into a better place, because it's not you telling them what to do. It's you saying, I understand that you understand this world, and I'd really like to understand it too, so I can do my job better, and then we can both be better at our jobs.
And as a developer, if you're a developer side, even if you're the Hampton where I don't know art at all, I love art but I can't do art kind of thing, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have an eye or develop an eye to be able to say this feels wrong.
To learn to speak the language.
Yeah, learn to speak the language, and UX is not about, design is not just about the pretty, quote unquote. It is about how it works, right? The famous Steve Jobs quote.
Yeah,
so,
and there's accessibility, there's all kinds of factors in interaction that you don't have to be a brilliant artist to understand.
Sure, and those are, if you kind of say, well, that's the designer's problem, you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated by this concept. I've been thinking about this for a couple of years. What are the UX things that developers can do, right? And not even necessarily front-end devs, but back-end devs. What are those choices? How can you kind of instill that way of thinking into somebody who's not who doesn't have UX experience? I would love to talk about that post-panel. I think
Flow.
Well,
because its database decisions reflect all the way up.
Yeah. Yes.
Just getting a basic reading on information design in general is so many developers who are really interested in this topic that I know have been to the Edward Tufte course, and that's the basic core of here's information design, let's talk about charts, y'all, and why we all hate PowerPoint. Not why PowerPoint is bad, but why do people hate it, and there's reasons.
And why do people abuse it?
Yeah, they abuse it, but there is a place for it, but understanding the why and not just implementation.
Yep.
But I think there's a few audience questions hanging out.
First, to affirm that, I think no matter where we work or what we do, always encourage designer-developer partnerships and relationships.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So that's just something I wanted to affirm. I want to go back a few about frameworks. I just had a quick opinion, is that I think if what you said about your team making your custom framework and then you only have one new design a quarter, that's awesome, right? But for people here who are new or who are figuring things out or whatever, frameworks are genius because you can jump into something, you can have something out in a day, and you can learn a lot from the code and the framework. Mm-hmm. I actually learned most of my web development 2.5 years ago jumping into Bootstrap just to see what the heck is going on. So I think if you're doing a hack or you're doing an internal thing where your client doesn't care what it looks like, Bootstrap, boom, done. It's internal. You got paid for it. You launched it. It's genius, right? But if you're going to put something out in the world and you want our peers to see it and respect it and you want to be respected, Bootstrap is probably not your best choice. But they did do somebody said they kind of set a standard, which was a style guide standard almost, all these little elements that you see. But my opinion is that, my continued opinion is that Foundation is so good because it does allow you to roll your own in a quick way.
Yep.
So I just wanted to say that they're not always good, they're not always bad. I think it just depends on your use case.
I tell when I teach like at Maker Square, and they're learning Rails, and so like they don't get a lot of front end stuff, and so when I talk to them, and they ask me the same question every single class. They're like, what about like should I use like Bootstrap or like Foundation, or like what's your opinion on frameworks? And it's like pick the right tool for the job, and I think that's kind of what you were getting at, right? Like, am I a developer trying to put out a plugin, or like am I just trying to learn? Like, do I want to hack on this stuff for myself? Am I trying to make my mom's cousin's friend a thing that I want to learn on, or am I trying to develop?
You need to pay your rent.
Right. Yeah.
My husband got like $200, $300 from redesigning a website for his flight instructor. He's like, oh my God, this is like the best thing ever. And it was just done in Bootstrap. I mean, I looked at it, I'm like,
that's Bootstrap.
It's Bootstrap. But to people, other people that are not.
It's true. That's like, there's like a bigger point to that of like, sometimes when we get like very like navel gazing about these things, like we forget that like, for many people, like the internet is Google. Like,
or Facebook.
The page is the internet.
Yeah.
Like, so, yeah.
Small percentage of people know Bootstrap.
I think it's also important, like one distinction I like to make is that internal doesn't necessarily mean easier. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can just pass it off because, like for Living Social example, internal users are 4,000 people. Mm-hmm. And so very small productivity gains actually affect the bottom line. Right. Now, if you have 10 people and 2 of them are actually doing your production work and using your admin system, well, that's ludicrous. Don't spend 4 weeks making a beautiful.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it depends, of course.
Who was it yesterday?
I think it's also important to remember with that the whole issue of frameworks versus rolling your own. Hi.
Oh, there you go. Sorry. I was like,
where is this voice coming from?
the voice.
Oh, I sound different.
It's not an on-off switch. It's not one or the other.
Right.
You can use a lot of other people's code rolling your own.
Yes.
And it's a whole continuum. There's a lot of modular plugins that you can build your own framework using entirely someone else's code. So it's not yes or no. I will either write it all internally or
the most basic of frameworks is like normalize.
When I show like the students I teach at Maker Square like SASS stuff, they're like, "How do you learn to write all these like CSS3 mix-ins with all like the different gradient?" And I'm like, I did not write that. Like, you've got to be kidding me. Nobody writes that. It's already been done.
We just copy the same line over and over again.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, no.
So that segues into a question that did come in as well: is do you use many pre-made components in your own frameworks?
All the time.
And if so, what ones do you use and you like?
Pre-made components.
Can you think like grab from other? Yeah. Like, do you take Twitter Bootstrap's JavaScript thing, or do you take?
Sometimes I'm inspired by techniques a lot. Yeah. Like if I see how like man, like I still remember like last year Eventbrite got a new Facebook button, and I was like, check out that button, and it was well commented.
Nice.
So it had all the fallbacks with the comments of why they were there, and I just like copied it and was like, this is how I'm going to build my next Facebook button. Yeah. Like not the exact same thing, but learning the lesson from how they did it.
Yeah. And I think again back to CSS3 mix-ins, like they have been done. They have been done and tested, right? You can actually like literally pull those entire things. And for me, like the grid stuff that I did was like some combination of like Dave Rupert's like Foldy 960 and some stuff that I don't remember, like some other like media query stuff, and then like Chris's like grid for loop thing, and I was like sending him chats being like, help me, I don't know how this works. But it's like now, it's cool. Like I didn't have to write that. I didn't have to go like figure out how to do all that. It was much easier, and it did exactly what I wanted without being like a huge, a whole entire framework. So like pulling all those little bits and pieces from the places that are inspiring to you or relevant to you, right?
And it's not, I mean, you made a perfect point. It's not binary. I mean, I don't know what it's about. I think it's about 20% of Wild is Bootstrap derived. We actually are using the Bootstrap buttons file, and then we did a whole bunch of tweaks for different kinds of buttons, different
Wild
sizes.
is the internal app?
This is the internal, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry, Wild is our internal gem that does our style guide. And we use a lot of the standard jQuery accordion and stuff like that, and then we tweak it. So it's they've figured out how to make this work. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pull these pieces in, but
don't reinvent the wheel. Really.
Right. And for us, it was we pulled a couple things from Bourbon, things like that. So we definitely, and I mean, I think if you're doing this from scratch the first time, and you really want to roll your own, that's probably like pulling pieces to build it, and then saying, being able to modularly say this doesn't work well anymore. let me now either roll my own or, hey, this one over here is really cool.
Well, just kind of as an aside, I think for the newer people, there is some value in learning how to write these mix-ins or like learning how to do this stuff, but you don't necessarily have to go to like the depths of like having it be production ready, like CSS3 gradient mix-in all by your lonesome, right? Like that's already been done, but you can go in CodePen and edit it and play with it and see how it works, and you can go in and write, play with extends and play with mix-ins and like understand how the bits and pieces that you're pulling from other places are being created, right? Like even if you couldn't necessarily write all of that yourself.
And one good way to, if you're like kind of new into the SASS world, one thing that's helped me a lot is actually taking, say, a button file or one of these kind of old CSS files that is not dynamic and saying, I'm going to just port this to SCSS.
I want to do a little like audience participation. How many of you are like fairly new, like within the last like year or so to SASS?
Cool.
Nice. That's awesome.
Welcome.
And you're loving it, right? You're here.
Any haters?
Yeah. This guy.
Speaking about haters, here's one for each of you, and then maybe the audience will also participate. Speaking of haters, here's a question. Sorry. We could.
I want an individual hater. Like one each.
You need a dedicated hater?
What are your biggest pet peeves about SASS and or Compass?
Okay, so important note. Who did this question come from? It's on Twitter. Come on.
You saw it earlier,
well,
so I know who.
My biggest pet peeve was the Compass grid system, and that's now gone. So.
Nesting and the old syntax.
See, I'm going to have to disagree with you because nesting can be awesome. It's not the fault of nesting that people abuse it. Just like it's not float's fault that we like horribly screw them up and use them for a layout, right?
I mean,
it's a tool.
But like I also think, so then I qualified with also the old syntax, because the way the old syntax being like white space dependent, like it actually, I feel like when people wrote it in that syntax, it highly encouraged nesting. Because one of the things I told people when I was like, stop using the old syntax, is that you're allowed to indent things because it's not white space specific in SCSS. So if you really, really desperately want something to be indented beneath something else, you can have it.
Right.
And you don't have to generate like 7 levels deep selectors because of it.
So I'll admit I use the .ss syntax.
Also,
and
it encourages descendant selectors and not first child selectors, or not direct child selectors, which I'm like my
But I think that's an evolution. I think
direct
people start off with SASS,
over descendant selectors.
or at least when I started with SASS, it was like replicate the DOM, and I was using the new syntax. And I was just like replicate the DOM. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And it was more so I was setting it up because I will add styles there. And now I've it's much more of a I'm only going to write the styles I need and then refactor and refactor and refactor.
So I'm with you like on the indentation thing where like that's how I think I and probably a lot of people used to visually format their CSS files is like to indent stuff under like the parent, not nesting but like indenting to visually organize. But I actually like the .sass syntax. Like I don't know I use it.
I like the indent syntax.
It's all getting pulled from my code base. Yeah.
I mean, it's. I think honestly, it's not really different.
This is one of the things when I first started that I also hated about it, because I feel like there's also, and this is I JavaScript a lot, and I am not on Team CopyScript, because I also do think that there is a benefit that you get when you're close to what you get.
Sure.
Yeah. So so context switching basically. So staying close to what your output is, because if someone who already hated writing CSS, they're like, oh, awesome, I hate writing CSS, now I can write SASS, and nothing looks like CSS anymore, and then they're debugging in the browser, because that's where we make things. Right. It doesn't get you out of it. You still have to look at it in the browser, and then you don't understand the CSS anymore because you had to context switch and you can't read it anymore.
Yeah, so the way that I use the nesting, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, is namespacing modules. Because then we can kind of reuse classes. We have so many different things, and so I'll have the parent module, and I think John was kind of showing this in his talk too, right? You have the name of your module and then the sub stuff, and so then you can use state classes is active, is hidden, whatever, inside of a module without them being kind of global. Yeah, it's cool, and
I thought you were talking about the left sidebar, and then the header in the left sidebar, and then the span inside.
If I was talking about that, I should be like forcibly ejected from this venue. No, I mean, but I think nesting again, like it's not evil all by itself, and I think the SASS syntax is kind of the same way. Like you have to be very aware of what you're writing. You have to look at your output, right? And if you're not, then you are doing it wrong, and your CSS too, like your output that is CSS should be close to the CSS that you would have written. And I don't know. I don't mind doing that extra step. I think as an author, I much prefer the SASS syntax. I like the way it is. I like the way it looks. I find it easier to read. I like to write it. But I still look at my output file, right?
And that's like for me. Like I have a friend, and I really like the way he said this. He just said this the other day. He was like, all glory to the build system. Like that, like you should do whatever you want, and all glory to the build system. Like, so the build system does, so like, as long as you can work that way and your team works that way, awesome. Like, that's just like, I have a very strong opinion in how I work that way, and I was just like, no deal, because I really like CSS, and so I'm very in a CSS world, and I like staying close to that. Like,
well, and up until 3 or 4 months ago, my team was me, right? So that made it very, very easy to control.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think
now you have to dictate everything to the minions.
Yes.
One thing developers often do is that they say, oh, I don't like the way CSS looks or ERB looks or things like that. And instead of saying, instead they just kind of switch to something and say like Haml or Slim or less or Sass or something. And instead of saying refactoring and learning how to do good typographic refactoring and write good HTML and CSS in the first part.
Yeah, because you probably don't like HTML because you're writing too much of it.
Right, and I mean, and I've actually, Hampton's probably, I don't know if he's laughing because I've riffed on Haml. No, I've riffed on Haml a lot in my day, but it's not Haml that's the problem. It's that people sit there and say, oh, well, ERB is ugly, and therefore Haml solves that problem. And it's like, well, maybe
you can still
ERB
write
is not the problem. You can still write terrible code with Haml.
Yeah.
You can write awful CSS or Sass or SCSS or whatever. It's like you are the author. You have the responsibility.
SASS isn't going to fix that for you.
And so many of these tools, you see, like if the team's really efficient, and you just get a massive multiplier. Like my co-author Bruce Williams, they use a bunch of Haml in the stuff they're building for the merchant side, and they're really fast with it. But they know how to write good HTML in the first place. So for them, it's just a force multiplier.
Yeah.
It's not it's not ugly anymore. It's I can just write faster, or how the great example that you had in your talk yesterday, where just I can look down it and immediately, boom, I internalize the document structure.
So I want to go back to the original question, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, and this is probably
what
a thing.
What was the original question?
The haters hate.
Haters, what?
Haters gonna hate.
The original question.
What are your pet peeves in SASS and or Compass? And we talked about this earlier about like the theming variable thing. Like I really, really, really would love to have like my client variables and then be like, image URL like client variable and then like whatever client name that I like, whichever client it is, then it will like inject that for me. And that's probably not a thing that's gonna happen.
But it's like
super
cool. Maybe. So this has
or maybe I just don't know how to do it.
Well, this has to be more complicated than I'm thinking, because could you just set like a variable that is like the asset path for whatever, and then at compile you like pass, like you change those variables?
We do something like that. We have there's a paths file in Wild that basically you can set all of those things up, because we have one instance where we have to actually, we're still in Rails, we're pre-asset pipeline. So we actually have a shell script that dumps everything out into static Rails asset pipeline, the Ruby on Rails.
Right, but you're pre-asset?
2.3. In production. So when you have to support all things like it, we dump everything out statically, but we can actually specify in there all the paths, so when it prints it all out, it's printing out the proper location for that app.
We have, there may be some things that I'm like not understanding. I think it would work for images, but I want to be able to do stuff like in my style sheets, like if it's this client, do X. If it's this client, do that. If it's this client, do like this other thing. And you can't like do that dynamically. At least like I could not get any of that to work.
So we're gonna take one more question. Okay.
Okay. So my question is about the frameworks, and particularly custom frameworks that you guys have rolled your own. Is I guess what we're saying today. What are some methods of evangelizing and like getting other people on your team to actually use the frameworks? So I've done the same thing where I developed a framework for my team, and it's great for rapid prototyping for me because I spent 6 months building it, so I know exactly how it works. But like, how do you make it accessible to other people? Like, do you guys do code reviews? Do you have tutorial sessions and like hacks? Like, what are just some methods of like getting other people on board with your
I'm
framework?
pro doing all those things. Another cheat is also to like volunteer to indoctrinate your interns whenever you have interns.
Yeah, the most successful.
Because your interns are often hired. So if you get them first.
Yeah. The most successful intern I worked with, he started earlier than all of our other summer interns. I spent half of the day I picked a ticket from our backlog, and we just sat there. And he always came, like, none of the other interns, like, asked questions. They just kind of assumed. But he's like, I remember this thing that we talked about. Can you remind me? Or I have this opinion on this. What are your thoughts? And just kind of, like, taking that time and saying, like, I know you're new to this. Let's talk about it a little bit. We also have a place to talk on Fridays. We have lightning talks, and you can get up there and say, hey, this is what I've been working on. This is really cool. You should use it if you have any questions. We also do code reviews, and that's where you say, hey, no. And just, kind of like stop it there. But often you have to be pretty vigilant about that because weird style things will just kind of start shipping if you're not watching. I like just sitting here, it's like I want to create a gem that's called Kill Switch or something and just like monitor like the CSS. There maybe something already exists.
Like a pre-commit hook, you mean?
Well, no, and like I was kind of thinking like even if it got pre-commit or like if somebody's trying to deploy it to a staging environment and a new file got added into your CSS folder, be like, nope, fails. You can't deploy that.
It breaks the build.
Yeah, it breaks the build. And just be like,
you sit in the chair of shame.
Yeah, like why did you add a new file or why did you do that? Like just kind of like you have to be really sometimes vigilant about it.
But I think it's always the key thing is always the like the way I figured out is I'm like, how can I trick them into not seeing that I might be giving them more work? How can I give them less work?
Right, it's a little more work now to learn something new, but you're saving.
But like, so it's like, how can, it's like trying to make that value proposition, like in an effective way. Give them ownership. Yes, giving ownership is a very good tip that we got from here.
There is one last question.
Okay.
Can one of you complain about the verbose add include syntax in SCSS?
The what?
The verbose what?
Add include syntax for SCSS.
Add include. You mean because there's quotation marks?
That's not a question.
That was a request.
Yeah.
Why don't you complain about it? You complain about it.
Chris, I'm complaining. I wish to register a complaint.
So Chris asked that question to troll me because I'm always complaining about the at include in SCSS because it's really long. And
it is really long. The plus.
I'm not a minimalist. I know everybody thinks it, but it's just a lot. This whole thing.
Word include?
Yeah. Just make an alias for at ink or something and make it happen.
But
Pull request. Come on.
This is not.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I'm the only one who's annoyed by it.
So the original syntax had the plus sign. Has the plus sign, and you can also use that include. So the question has long been like, will you bring a shorthand syntax to the CSS syntax? And maybe we can ask Nathan why that's hard.
That is actually a fantastic segue.
Segue into what's happening next.
Dun, dun, dun. So, Nathan is coming up for question and answer. So.
So, we now have a panel with panelist plus Nathan. Who has questions for panelist plus Nathan?
We get to stay. Well, somebody get this man a chair. This is rude. We're so rude right now.
It's coming.
Yes.
Awesome.
Nathan,
No, get
first
it.
question is, what about that verbose add include syntax in SCSS?
So, even if you take for granted, is my mic working?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything.
On switch.
Have you tried turning it off?
Turn it off and on. Is it plugged in?
Right now. Is it working now? Nope.
Is there a way to? Oh, there we go. Cool.
They said turn your mic.
So, even if you take for granted that you want a shorter at include syntax in SCSS, which there are positives and negatives of, you probably want to do something that people are familiar with. So you want it to be similar to some degree to the indented syntax plus syntax. But in addition to that, the people who have been most excited about this have also been pushing for a way to make the shorter syntax look more like a property. So they want to be able to do something like plus the name of the mixin, colon, the arguments, either space separated or comma separated, which would look cool. It's nice to have syntaxes that feel similar to other syntaxes you're used to using. The biggest problem with that is that it creates an edge case where there's an ambiguity. As you know, in SASS, you can nest selectors. And also, in CSS, you can use plus as a way to combine selectors to do adjacency relationships. And also, when you have mixins, you can pass content blocks to them, which you can then reference using @content. What all of this means is that if you write plus and then the name of the mixin and then a colon and then an argument, which is also an identifier, all of this without any spaces, and then an open bracket, there's no way for SASS to tell if that is supposed to be a selector or an invocation of a mixin. And that sort of ambiguity is very, very bad. So that's the major stumbling block. I have been thinking more about this lately, and I don't think that's fatal. I think since people are unlikely to want to invoke a mixin in a way without putting a space after the colon, I think it might be good enough to just say you have to have a space after the colon when you're invoking a mixin in this way. And if you don't, we're going to treat it as a selector. So that might be coming in an upcoming version.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
What is your SASS pet peeve?
My SASS pet peeve.
The thing that you want to fix.
In the language?
Well, so this was Chris's question. What's your what's your pet peeve?
I mean, I get to fix a lot of the things that.
What's the one that is driving you crazy right now?
Well, right now, the thing that bothers me the most is how primitive the way you include other files is. Like it's literally just like a text include, right? You take the other file and just drop it in your file, and this has several awkward consequences. It means that if some like SASS file somewhere way off in your dependencies includes something, you just have everything that file defines, no matter what. You have no say about it. Mm-hmm. So you get its mixins, you get its top-level variables, and that's awful. It also means that there's no way for you to take a file that you want to include and only use some of the things from it in your file. So like one thing that we've always sort of, since we added extend, that we've wanted to be able to support is taking just a file that someone created as just as a way to style stuff, like even maybe a plain CSS file, and being able to extend the stuff you care about, but not the stuff you don't. So similar to the way placeholder selectors work, but using a file or a library that wasn't defined that wasn't written with placeholder selectors in mind. So
it's almost like a deactive, like an inactive vaccine kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you the way include works right now just doesn't allow any of that. It doesn't allow any sort of like namespacing either. And that's something that Chris and I are going to be working really hard on in upcoming releases. Our grand plan for SASS 4.0 is to have a completely revamped module inclusion system, which will have all of these features and more. It also will allow you to load a .css file it will not be named @include, so it won't have this incredibly awkward conflict with an existing thing in CSS that we have to maintain compatibility with. So that'll be great.
Cool.
Questions from the audience?
There's
You know,
he needs a mic.
it's right there.
Hi, I was curious what keeps globbing statements out of import statements in just standard SASS.
This is something we get asked about a lot. So the biggest concern is that the way globbing works is inherently unstable with respect to the order of the files that get imported. So it means that you can sort of impose some stability there. You can say, all right, we're going to order them alphabetically. But it's arbitrary, and what's more important is it's not based on something that the user has an understanding of affecting the way their CSS comes out. And one thing that's a little bit awkward about CSS is it's a language where order matters, and often order matters in very subtle but meaningful ways. So if you have two arbitrary CSS rules and you flip their order, it's possible that that will make some part of your site that rarely gets looked at completely unusable. So the way this relates to globbing is that if we allow globbing, what that means is that if someone renames their file, something that you should feel safe doing, it could change the styling of your website in subtle and hard to detect ways, and that's something that we are extremely worried about.
We are professional developers. You can trust us. just trust us, Nathan.
There are like the people in this room I can absolutely trust, but unfortunately, I don't want the people in this room to be the only people who use SASS.
Can you put in a secret, like turn off the safe mode switch?
Yeah, there's a SASS globbing package that you can get. It's a plugin, and people use that, and you're welcome to do so.
But then it can't get into libsass.
It's important. I'm a big believer in the idea of many small experiences combining to give a larger impression. So it's important to me to minimize as much as possible the number of small ways that SASS can make you feel like you're doing something that might not be safe. So even if only 10% of the developers and each have one time where the ordering of the files being loaded causes them confusion and pain and makes their site break in a way they don't understand, that's still, that adds up on top of additional confusion that's just sort of built into learning a new language or to ways that we have to interact with CSS to make things work. And eventually that can hit a critical mass that causes people to just become upset with the language. And that is the point we don't want people to reach.
In the back, purple.
Yeah, just back to the Okay, just back to the question we had before about SASS and CSS, SCSS. I don't know a lot of people using SCSS. I love SASS for a lot of reasons. I was just wondering, do a quick poll. Who's using SASS? Raise your hands. And SCSS? Okay. That's very interesting because for all the people that are now in Europe, but mostly they are users, they are using SAS for a very long time. And if you're working in a big team and you're a really experienced front-end developer and having no Git issues with that and having a standard syntax helps a lot. But I know for open source projects that we use SCSS only and other reasons. So yeah, quite interesting. Thank you.
Other questions?
I'm actually kind of surprised by how few of us in here are using the SAS syntax. Like, I know.
That's the beauty of it. It's like, I don't even know.
Oh no, save the laptop.
That is the, I want to be straight up honest. I don't even know the difference.
What?
I don't know the difference.
Oh, okay. So like
you're about to get educated right now.
SASS is
and I
white
use
space
whatever
opinionated.
I'm using, which I guess is SAS, or I don't even.
Does it look like CSS? Does it have curly brackets?
Oh, okay, yes, that is.
Yeah.
That's the
curly brackets. I
That's
use
what we're
curly
talking
brackets.
about. So yeah,
That's
so like the .sass is like the kind that's very white space dependent. And
So
it
one
looks-
Now I
would
remember
look like
that is
camel.
Camel, yeah.
Well, where did that come from? Where did the non-bracket?
That was the original, no?
Yeah.
It was the only one for a very.
Well, I'm late to the game,
Yeah.
but
So
the beauty is.
So could I jump in here? So I actually have an opinion on this. I've been using SAS since the beginning, kind of thing, and was originally very, very rabid, like original syntax kind of user. So I can very much identify with you as well. But I feel like it's important not to underemphasize the value of the SCSS syntax as well from a evangelism perspective.
Yes.
As soon as we added that, there was just a whole new openness in the CSS community to like trying SAS. So, I mean, I don't know if we're ever going to end up with one syntax versus the other. Nice. You want to talk one syntax versus the other, but it's huge on the evangelism side. The other thing that I would add, and so I've written.
There are opinions happening right now.
I've written an article about this on the SAS Way. You can go check out. I'm comparing like the differences between the two syntaxes and the value there. I would say the big thing for me is that using a more free-form syntax like CSS, particularly once you get away from the nesting, it's just a lot more, fun, expressive. There's times when being forced into that, rigid indentation oriented things, your CSS files span like tons of lines. And I find myself often really pleased to just collapse like all the hover state of an item on one line if it's just changing a color or something like that. So I don't know. There's value on both sides.
I don't mean to interrupt. We don't have the auditorium for much longer, and it's a very rare treat to have Nathan on stage. So do we have more questions for Nathan? We can continue this debate upstairs too. When we go back, but
I don't think this is. Oh, is it on? Yeah. This is kind of a small one, but I was wondering if you could tell us your thoughts on generating an error in a style sheet in case the person is calling your mixin or something in a way that totally won't work and will not do what they want, and the warning is not really enough.
I think we have an at error directive now. Did we not added that yet? No? We should add that.
The only thing I could think of was to call a mixin that definitely does not exist to make the error.
Yeah, well, it's one of those issues that's been filed for a while, and it's just one of the we definitely want to do this, but there are a lot of issues that we definitely want to do. So it's a getting around to it question. Patch is welcome.
Rob, you want to go ahead?
So the big benefit of Compass is, one of the big benefits of Compass is that you can dip into the Ruby layer and expose new functions to SAS. What are the plans for making a parallel system with libsass? Is this something that I should ask you, or I should ask?
It's definitely a Hampton question.
That's a Hampton question. Okay, pass it on.
I think
Scott, do you have
Scott's an interesting
question?
for a while.
I was just wondering if you had any guesses as to how many jelly beans you've got.
Wait, if he guesses in a range, does he get more jelly beans?
It's just like Price is Right, where it's the
Yeah,
without going over.
This is like a high school math. Like, how many jelly beans are in the jar? Like, I hate it.
I am the worst at estimating, so I'm going to say somewhere between 10 and 1 million.
Safe bet.
Sounds good to me.
Any more hands?
There's one back there.
Right there.
Oh, Mike, hold on.
Hi, how you doing? Is there ever a possibility of getting dynamic imports?
It's pretty unlikely. Like, the way... Sorry? Like being able to say, like, import and then, like, interpolating a variable into the import.
That would be rad, though.
It'd be amazing.
But it could.
It's not impossible, but it would require a lot of strain on the order we do our parsing and resolution, and it's like many instances of adding the ability to do things more dynamically. It would require a pretty convincing use case for us to start pushing that far.
Theming and IE support.
Say more.
Oh, now I'm on the spot. But kind of back to the like client theming stuff I was doing earlier. Like, I can see a case for that in what I do, right? Where I have, some clients only want like certain parts of things, and I want to have, I want to import like these style sheets, and then like also this, style sheet like with this client variable in it. I am totally on the spot right now. I have to like think about this a little bit in more
Honestly,
detail.
like, I don't know if you can you do this right? Can you do like import blank and like kind of Ruby-esque, like import blah, if blah, or unless blah?
No, that would. No.
Yeah. Yeah, but I can see like a way that I would use that.
You can't do blocks.
Here's something that is more likely to happen. That gets you, I think, part of the way to doing what you want. In our fancy new world of exceptionally powerful and awesome imports, we may have the ability to do something like, say, like do an import, but wrap it in a mixin.
Okay.
So, like, I think it's important for a lot of the infrastructure around how SASS compilation works, that the set of all files that might be touched when you do a compilation can be known without running the compilation itself. But if you have more information, if you have enough information to say, here are the files that I'm going to import, but the way I use those imports may vary. And this could also potentially be done with putting them in an if, but I think being able to have the single way of saying wrap it in a mixin, and then be able to use the existing ways of dynamically dealing with mixins. And we'll probably also move to being able to interpolate when you do an include in the mixin name. So that'll also help if you want to like have a variable that's the name of your theme or something like that.
That would be awesome.
I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
So what is the best or most preferred way for us as developers to contribute back to Compass and SASS?
Pull requests on GitHub. Unfortunately, there are like 6 or 7 that are sitting there and have been sitting there for quite a while. Chris and I both have a limited amount of time that we can devote to SASS and Compass. My next priority, now that we've got the sort of ball rolling on 3.3 in earnest, once that is out, my next priority is to clear out those pull request queues and hopefully be more on top of them in the future.
Mm-hmm. Are you looking for other maintainers, or how would that go?
That's something that I would hope would evolve from consistent pull requests over time and like becoming confident that someone making these pull requests sort of understands the style and what needs to happen with a new feature. Because there's like this whole checklist of things that need to be done when you add like a new element of syntax. You have to, add it, add tests, make sure that SASS convert works properly with it, et cetera, et cetera. And these are things that for a pull request, for like individual pull requests, we're happy to, sort of shepherd people through that process.
Is there documentation on what it is that you check?
Documentation?
I'm sorry.
What's your hate
No.
of documentation?
I'm not hating. I'm just skeptical that it exists.
I think there's a contributing file, but I think it's very old. But that is also that's something I would like to exist. It's again,
I
definitely want it. Haven't gotten around to it.
Just because my coworker did want to contribute, and if we can make it easier to get certain things fixed or contributed, maybe other people out there want to help as well.
Yeah.
Having Compass needs more help.
It's actually true. Like,
no, if we know, like I think if us.
Is there a punch list somewhere? Of
Yeah, like if we can help with like this is what we need
GitHub,
to make
okay.
sure. I'm not an expert at this, but that's why I brought the question up.
We have time for one more question.
What's limiting current compilation speed in the Ruby version of SASS?
I'm not a performance expert, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But we've at various times made pushes to make it faster, and usually what that's ended up doing is running some profiling on it when compiling large files and seeing what the bottlenecks are, and usually there's been some like major bottleneck. At one point it was like parsing static properties that don't have any variables in them, and then we found a way to speed that up. Or at one point it was reparsing files that like imported files that you'd already parsed before in a previous compile, and then we added caching and sped that up. For the last several versions, when we've run the profiling, all we've seen is that the time it's taking is spread very evenly across all parts of the project, which is exactly what we don't want to see, because that means there's no place we can target to say, all right, if we do this one thing, it'll get a lot faster. There may be room for additional caching at a further level. I was talking with someone about this last night. That's probably the most fruitful way to look, but I think at the time it takes to do a first-time compile right now may just be limited by the speed of Ruby and the string processing we need to do.
Okay, so that closes our panel and the last talk of SASS Conf. Let's give a round of applause.